This is Open Mind Alexander Technique. I'm Jess. Today we're looking at what is it like to stand and spiral in order to turn and look at things. For example, if you were to turn and point at something or reach for something. This is an interesting one because it requires people to really examine their weight shifting and weight placement, which is something we'll talk about a little bit more later in terms of what are some things that can be done more effectively when you're really aware of your spiraling and turning in space. So let's get clear on the terminology here. When I'm talking about a spiral, this might not be in just the spine. When we talk about seated spirals, it's mostly just the spine. There might be a little bit of shift in the legs, but not much. When we're standing, that's different. A spiral, again, rotating around the same axis of the spine, might go all the way down to the feet, depending on how far I need to go. So I can start with just my eyeballs, and then I can take that into gentle spirals, and I can make some choices here about how much do I want to isolate movement into the upper parts of my spine, or the whole spine, or all the way down to my feet. So when I turn, and I encourage you all to explore this as well on your own, when I turn, I've got a lot of options. I can, because I happen to have plenty of movement available in my neck, not everyone does, but I happen to have a lot, I can turn to fully 90 degrees with just my neck and my shoulders are still going to face forward. It's not great. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of muscle pull in order to rotate this fully 90 degrees just in my cervical spine, so neck up. But I can if I really need to. But that's something that is just extra work and I don't want to. It's also not very comfortable. So I'm more likely, if I need to turn to look fully 90 degrees from front, I'm going to involve more of myself in order to make that happen. A phrase that can be useful for this is, my whole spine is available to help. Or if we extend that, my whole body, my whole self is available to help with this movement. I don't necessarily have to just isolate it for regular everyday movements where it's not necessary. So to turn to look fully 90 degrees, I might get to, I don't know, maybe halfway, maybe less even, before the rest of me starts to move. So it's pretty quick and it's pretty fluid to be able to turn. Now going to fully 90 degrees is actually a pretty big spiral. And it's going to be a little bit more comfortable if I allow more of myself, more of my whole skeletal structure to be involved in that. I can also play around with isolating just my upper torso, right, from kind of waist up by keeping my pelvis facing forward and rotating from there. And that gives me a stretch. I'm going to feel a stretch in my diagonal and side-to-side muscles here. And that can be a good thing if you want to stretch, great. But maybe for regular everyday, just turning to look at something as part of an activity where stretching isn't your goal, maybe you don't need to do that. Maybe it can come from a really well-distributed spiral all the way down to the feet. Then we get to make some choices about where to place balance. So in the same way that while we're seated, we can place our balance either towards the sit bone or the side of the pelvis that we're sitting on, towards where we're spiraling, or keep it pretty centered, or away, right, kind of backing away, putting some distance as I'm spiraling. We can do the same thing while we're standing. And I'm going to feel that all the way down to my feet. So it's basically shifting weight all the way down to my feet. There are some pros and cons of different ways to do this, which are interesting to dig into. If my balance is pretty good, this is probably the one I'm going to use when I turn to actually look at something and walk towards something, leaning forward and going towards the leg that I'm leaning over. So if I need to turn and walk that way while looking at it, I'm likely to start that turn with my weight forward as I'm doing the turn. I could also spiral first, staying split weight until I can see what I'm looking at, and then turn and start walking. So that's another option. I find I almost never do that one because it feels very like stylized, like put this here and then rotate it this way and then we go. Another option that you can use is keeping the weight on the back foot as you're spiraling and then going forward. This one is particularly interesting. One of the medical conditions that Alexander technique has been quite well explored in and documented with is Parkinson's disease. There is a group, I think based out of North Carolina, called the Poise Project. And the Poise Project has done a lot of really wonderful studies and just great evidence-based research on what are the effects of Alexander technique with people who have Parkinson's, as well as with the caretakers of someone who has Parkinson's. One of the things that they discovered is if a person with Parkinson's or various other, movement and balance impacting neurological stuff might have to work with, if the person stays on the back foot and rotates by 90 degrees and then starts moving, they were a lot less likely to fall. So this was a smaller look into like just for people with Parkinson's and what happened, but it's something that I've really been able to extend to other students who have other balance issues, and it was very helpful for them. So let's practice this a little bit. If you've got balance issues, I would recommend setting yourself up with objects around you to be able to grab onto very easily, have some railings around you, stay safe. And then as you go to rotate, keep the weight on the back foot until you can really plant your front foot once it's already rotated and you've done your spiral, and then shift. Now on different people, you might have to do that a couple times along the way if you don't have a whole lot of rotation available in the legs. But getting this to 90 degrees and then navigating a room that way, so plotting out, only moving in 90-degree shifts of what angle you're moving in, they found really actually did reduce rate of falling, which is pretty cool. So here's what it might look like. If I need to step forward and then rotate, I can step, and then I'm going to keep my weight on my back foot as I'm rotating until I can get good contact, and then I would continue forward from there. So standing and spiraling isn't just something that we only use to look or point at something, it's also how we navigate space. We very rarely will start moving without looking where we're going. So I would encourage you to play around with this and get curious. How do you spiral while you're standing? And how does that impact your stability as you're doing it?